gavel, but I'd like to know where it is. In here. There we go. You see that part? Good morning. The subcommittee will come to order. Pursuant to notice, the Subcommittee on Energy and Environment meets to consider the committee print of the National Climate Service Act of 2009. We will now proceed with the markup. This morning, the subcommittee meets to consider the National Climate Service Act of 2009. I want to commend Chairman Gordon for his work on this bill and his leadership in climate and ocean issues. Witnesses at our subcommittee hearing last week provided a good overview of the different organizations engaged in the development and delivery of climate service products. We also heard from several witnesses whose organizations utilize climate information in their day-to-day management decisions, operations, and planning. In a climate that is changing, it is imperative that we have reliable information to help us adapt and respond to these changes. We must take a more strategic approach and structure the delivery of climate information and services to benefit the nation. A national climate service will support regional, state, local, and tribal governments, individuals, and businesses in their efforts to make better decisions and plan for the future. The National Climate Service Act of 2009 establishes the National Climate Service within NOAA and defines its goals and the essential components of a service. The bill requires the administrator to establish a climate service office to coordinate the work of NOAA's line offices and programs that are needed to develop and deliver climate services. The bill defines 5 functions of the climate service office. The office is intended to provide a single point of contact for other federal agencies and stakeholders who are interested in climate information. The bill directs NOAA to build the service from the existing assets using an evolutionary approach and operate through the Climate Service Office and the network of regional, state, and local outlets that NOAA maintains today. The bill does not create a new line office, but draws upon the strengths and assets of the appropriate existing offices. The bill defines 5 core service elements for the National Climate Service. These include conducting analysis of climate impacts on society, making observations at multiple geographic scales, providing climate information, developing mechanisms to manage and disseminate data, and conducting research to improve climate information and products. The bill also directs the administrator to establish a Climate Service Advisory Committee in accordance with the Federal Advisory Committee Act with at least 2 subcommittees. One of the subcommittees is intended to focus on the science and technical issues associated with developing and improving climate information and products. The other is to provide ongoing input from the user community on the types of products needed and the best ways to deliver them to ensure their relevance to decision makers. Finally, the bill repeals the National Climate Program Act of 1978 to avoid duplication and confusion between the old statute and this new legislation. I urge the support of the members of the subcommittee for the bill and now recognize Mr. Inglis to present his opening remarks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The committee print before us today addresses the important need for a robust and comprehensive source of climate information. A wide variety of decision makers from local to global level are faced with long-term planning decisions and an uncertain climate future. A national climate service can help meet the information needs of these decision makers and help our communities and businesses make appropriate investment decisions. As we heard at last week's hearing, climate service capabilities exist in a number of federal agencies at the state level and in academia. An effective and efficient National Climate Service will properly coordinate these efforts and resources, avoid duplicative work, and support the needs of the user community. In order to do this, NOAA will have to reach out to a number of other federal and state agencies and reconcile these efforts with the robust set of work NOAA does at the global, national, and regional level. Ideally, the National Climate Service will also identify and respond to the particular needs of the user community. Many of these needs can be met with a federal focus. Weather prediction, observing, monitoring, and modeling capability at the federal level creates a reliable and homogeneous body of information for the entire nation. At the same time, many climate information needs will be extremely localized, requiring a narrow focus on things like regional precipitation, stream flow, or temperature data. An effective climate service would be flexible enough to respond to users with the appropriate level of information. Unfortunately, this bill falls short in both regards. Instead of pushing for interagency and government-wide participation, This bill assumes that NOAA has both the capacity and the resources to handle the National Climate Service on its own. The testimony from last week's hearing and the current resource questions at NOAA do not support this conclusion. The language also fails to acknowledge the crucial work of state climatologists in identifying and responding to user needs. Devolving a certain amount of responsibility to regional and state entities would create a far more agile and responsive National Climate Service than the bill we're looking at now. The National Climate Service should serve a critical role in enabling our communities and businesses to plan for an uncertain climate future. I look forward to trying to improve this bill to meet those needs, Mr. Chairman. And, you know, it's in the bill, there's actually a reference I would add to the United States Global Change Research Program, which I understand has a different kind of approach or a different kind of mandate than what we're talking about creating here for NOAA. The United States Global Change Research Program has the ability to work from the White House with USDA and various other groups, and basically has the authority of higher than the authority to create interagency cooperation. I'm not sure we're getting that out of what we've got here. I'm not sure we're getting NOAA in a position to get that interagency kind of cooperation, which is needed in order to pull off this job we're asking them to do. As Chairman and I have been discussing, this is the persistent question that we had back at the question persists from the hearing that we had on this, and so I wish there were a way to work this out so that we could get a better and clear source of authority for this important work that we're asking NOAA to do. So I understand NOAA has that authority existing, but I think if we created in them more the authority to work interagency, I think we would do better work. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I appreciate the gentleman's points. I think they're very well taken. I think I share many of those and would be happy to work with the gentleman to try to address some of these in the between now and the full committee markup. I think the issue is going to be how it is a daunting task. There are many agencies involved, as we've heard from our testimony, and we do want coordination. Otherwise, we'll have a symbolic entity and not actual real outcome. So I share the gentleman's concern, respect them, and would be pleased to work with you on those in the future. Chair now recognizes Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Gordon. And
thank you, Chairman Baird. And you've done an excellent job in explaining the base of this bill. So let me just also address Mr. English's concerns. So far in this process, there has been good collaboration between the Democrat and Republican staff. You clearly are taking, have always been a constructive, taking a constructive role on this committee. And so the reason that we go through regular order is so that we can better vet things. And we will, although we're somewhat on a faster track than we might like by virtue of what's going on in the other committees, and we want to be sure that we have our part of it. We need to work more this week, talk with you, let's get our best ideas put together, and because again, I know you want to do it in a constructive way. But we do need to have this weather service. It's very important. Climate change is well documented. It's real. If we were to stop all CO2 emissions today, which is not going to happen, but if we did, there's still going to be climate change in the future because of past emissions. You can't monitor what you can't measure, and we're going to need this service to be able to, as both Chairman Baird and Mr. English pointed out, to be able to get information to families and communities so they can mitigate these problems in the future. I look forward to working together and getting the best possible bill that we can, and I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank Chairman Gordon, and thank you again for your leadership on this and so many issues related to this important issue. Chair recognizes Ranking Member Mr. Hall for some opening comments.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you and Chairman Gordon for your attention to the concerns of Mr. English, a gentleman from South Carolina, as usual. I think it's very important that we're considering this committee print, which, as I understand, is intended to replace some of the language of the Waxman-Markey discussion draft that's to be marked up in the Energy and Commerce next week. And I'd be remiss if I didn't express some concern about how this language will be incorporated into a comprehensive cap and trade bill. I want to ensure that this committee print will have an opportunity to be marked up at both the subcommittee and the full committee to give all of our members a chance to consider the language. I also want to ensure that this will not be the only piece of the Waxman-Markey discussion draft that our committee and our committee will consider. This committee has a very important role to play in any debate on a cap and trade, and our members' input should not be eliminated in favor of any expediency. I sent a letter to the Speaker outlining areas of the original Waxman-Markey discussion draft that I believe the committee should mark up. Our committee's expertise should inform and determine whether and how to implement an economy-altering regulatory regime that at its very core will require accurate scientific observations, monitoring, and require verification of emissions and greenhouse gases. As Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Lisa Jackson recently stated, and I quote, "Science must be the backbone of what EPA does." This committee stands for that principle, and therefore it was of great concern to me that an Office of Management and Budget OMB memo scrutinized the scientific objectivity surrounding the EPA's recent endangerment finding for greenhouse gases. The White House memo questions the linkage between the agency's scientific technical support document and the agency's political summary. OMB, in the role of assisting federal regulatory agencies in ensuring and maximizing the quality, the objectivity, the utility, and the integrity of the information, noted that the EPA endangerment technical support document mentions areas where essential behaviors of GHGs are not well determined and not well understood. Further, the memo points out, and I quote, "There are currently no models available that forecast the potential impacts of greenhouse gases on climate change at the regional and local level, which are the levels at which our decisions are actually made." This begs the question of a regulatory scheme is not ready for prime time. What makes a legislative scheme that's a legislative scheme ready for prime time, I guess, is a question I have. And why would we as a committee move forward with even one element of a comprehensive regime to regulate greenhouse gases when neither Congress nor the EPA have undertaken a systematic risk analysis or cost benefit? We should really be cautious in moving forward before we have the proper national infrastructure for monitoring and modeling climate variability in place. I'd ask that the OMB memo, and I have it here, be included in the record of today's subcommittee markup, and further that we seek to limit duplicative effort in favor of gathering the necessary sound scientific data so that we might move forward in an informed manner. An informed decision is better than a billion-dollar gamble on our future. And I have this, and I ask unanimous consent to put it into the record. And weather and climate, I'm trying to wind up here, are very important topics, and I'm pleased that our committee remains at the forefront of policy discussions of this magnitude. Several years ago, we passed the National Integrated Drought Information System for NIDIS. This program provided information about current and past droughts and also produces drought seasonal forecasts. This type of information is essential to farmers, to water managers, to energy providers, and to many others. This is a climate service that NOAA is already providing. The bill before us would coordinate with NIDIS and other programs with NOAA to provide a more organized system to provide climate information to the nation. And while I'm not entirely convinced that any legislation on a climate service is necessary at this time, I understand that our hand has been forced by the workings of other committees. Therefore, as long as we're moving forward with this idea, I'd like to state for the record some concerns that I hope will be resolved before our committee finishes its work. Specifically, I'm concerned that duplication of efforts, the potential for a massive expansion of a bureaucracy, a potential ballooning of cost, and the creation of a top-heavy federal institution that squeezes out the work being done already at the state level and forces local policymakers to make decisions with information that really isn't useful to them. I'm hopeful as we move through regular order we'll be able to find some common ground, and I thank the chair for your leniency time-wise.
Would the gentleman yield?
I'd rather not, but I will.
All right. Mr. Hall, we are in a unique situation in that we both serve on Energy and Commerce and the Science Committee, and because of that, I think that we have the ability to better analyze what you might call the strengths and weaknesses of each committee in terms of the substantive areas. And let me assure to you that those areas where the Science Committee has a particular strength, we will be involved. This is just the first step. And anywhere else that there are jurisdictional responsibilities, we will move forward with that.
And I appreciate that, and I appreciate the chair.
Thank you, sir.
Thank Mr. Hall. Thank the chairman. Mr. Hall, I just would confirm that I think many of the points you raised at the end about reducing the potential for duplication, making sure that services provided are services needed, making sure there's strong coordination are all outstanding points, certainly topics that were addressed by our witnesses, topics I've addressed as we've drafted this bill, and I look forward to, and very many of them also echoed by Ranking Member Inglis. So I look forward to working with you, Mr. Inglis, and the chairman, of course, to try to address these as we move towards final mark of the committee. With that, I would ask unanimous consent that the print is considered as read and open to amendment at any point, and that the members proceed with the amendments in the order of the roster. Without objection, so ordered. If the first amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Hall. Mr. Hall, are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, sir. I think I have the amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to committee print, amendment number 003, offered by Mr. Hall of Texas.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with this reading. Without objection, so ordered. Recognize the gentleman from Texas for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Mr. Chairman, my amendment would require that a National Climate Service live up to its full intention as an operational organization and make sure that the decision makers at all levels of government receive the best information available. The National Weather Service puts out weather products every day that our economy and even our lives depend on. It seems that this legislation intends on creating a National Climate Service that would be operational in nature and provide information and data much like the Weather Service already does. If this is the case, then a climate service really should be held to a very high standard of data quality as well. Decisions about drought, which crops to plant, decisions even if there's sufficient water available to support new industry efforts in the future, will all depend on these products. And these decisions are no less important than the ones we make with Weather Service information. Furthermore, when given these climate products, decision makers should have the opportunity to see how this information came about. Direct measurement aside, many of these products will rely on modeling or other analysis that require many assumptions to go with them, into them. Several years back, the EPA conducted an analysis on how much it would cost average consumers if new regulatory controls were put in place. They relied on information from the Energy Information Administration, but the data they used was several years old. The difference between $2 per 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas and $9 per 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas, which is what it was when EPA finished the analysis, is substantial, especially when put through models that show the ripple effects across the economy. I don't want any state or local policymakers to be basing their decisions on models in which the parameters are not really and truly realistic. Finally, Mr. Chairman, my amendment would require that Climate Service Office created in this bill to make sure that the data that they're collecting through a national observation and monitoring infrastructure is of the highest quality. Earlier this year, one of our satellites that measures the extent of Arctic sea ice experienced malfunctions that led us to believe that there was 193,000 square miles less of Arctic sea ice than there really was. This is bigger than the state of California, Mr. Chairman. Quality control is it's not as big as Texas, but quality control is essential for decisions made based on operational data. Knowing all the facts is crucial. My amendment will ensure that sound science and facts are what guides our decisions. And I thank the chair and I thank others on that side and our committee assistants on each side for working together on this amendment.
Thank you,
I yield
Mr.
back
Hall.
my time.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. I share your concerns. I think a paramount duty of this committee is to ensure that all scientific data from any federal agency is of the highest caliber, and that is only achieved by transparency, to allow a thorough review of the methodology and the models and the data. So I heartily endorse your amendment. Thank you for offering it. Is there any further discussion on the amendment? If no, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The second amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from New York, Mr. Tonko. Mr. Tonko, are you ready to proceed with your amendment? The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to committee print, amendment number 002, offered by Mr. Tonko of New York.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This amendment codifies an existing program at NOAA, the Regional Integrated Sciences and Assessments Program, or RISA. The RISA program was established more than 10 years ago at NOAA. It supports regionally focused, user-oriented research that addresses complex climate-sensitive issues, issues of concern to resource managers and policy planners, including those related to transportation, to agriculture, to water resources, fisheries, and public health. There are currently 9 RISA teams throughout the country. They are primarily based at universities, but often include team members at government research facilities, nonprofit organizations, and in the private sector. These important multi-institutional partnerships develop close and productive relationships with federal, state, and local stakeholders within a region. These relationships enable RISAs to provide relevant, applied research on climate decision makers in formats that are readily applicable to regional and local situations. Testimony at last week's hearing indicated a need to expand the RISA program to serve all 50 states, and revealed that funding for the RISA program is so thinly stretched that user demand cannot currently be met. I believe that codifying this program is a significant first step in raising the profile of this important program, particularly in the context of a national climate service, and helping to ensure that RISA teams throughout the country continue to provide important user-oriented research and outreach. My amendment specifically requires the Undersecretary to establish RISA teams through a competitive, peer-reviewed selection process to conduct applied regional climate research and projects to address the needs of local and regional decision makers for information and tools to develop adaptation and response plans. It authorizes awards for RISA teams for 5 years for an amount of up to $300,000 per year. My amendment further requires the Undersecretary, in making awards, to consider the overall geographic distribution of RISA teams and existing gaps in applied research to support local and regional decision makers, the team's ability to contribute to NOAA's efforts to deliver climate services in the region, and the team's proposal to integrate social and physical sciences research to address the effects of climate variability and change on the ecological, economic, and social systems in that region. I urge my colleagues, Mr. Chair, to support this amendment and yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman for his comments. As is typical of Mr. Tonko, you have, I think, admirably incorporated many of the issues raised by our witnesses, and indeed in the process, I think, addressed some of the concerns of our colleagues who've wanted to make sure that this is applicable to local needs and local communities, and that we're coordinating the research. Is there further discussion on the amendment? Mr. Inglis is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question for the gentleman from New York. Is this, as I understand it, what you're doing is establishing in statute what is already administratively the case? That
Yes.
Cases exist. This just gives them statutory authority.
Absolutely.
And of course, very much like the peer-reviewed part of this, it sounds that's very attractive. As to the $300,000, is that what they're currently getting, as I understand?
It is. It is currently what the RISAs get, and we put in the $300,000 as a max.
So I guess if this is in statute, then it must be $300,000. If it were by administrative action, then it could be reduced from $300,000.
It says up to $300,000 in the statute
Right.
that's proposed.
So you couldn't do more in the statute. I guess
Right.
if the administrator, is this administrator? Yeah, if they wanted to do more, I wonder how that works. Under the current situation, if they want to do more than 300,000, they could. They could use their budget, presumably, to go more than 300,000. If we do this, then they're going to be limited to 300,000, which may be a good thing. I guess I'm trying to.
Well, I think we could obviously come back and review the situation as time passes, but if they've been using the 300,000 as a guideline, we felt that at least that should be maintained as a maximum.
Right. So the good news from a conservative dollar perspective is we're not spending any more money. Sort of the potentially, and maybe I like that. Maybe I like the idea of.
Don't let me push you away from your conservative thing.
Of capping it, but I guess I'm just wondering about. This is a little bit like the bill we had on the floor last week about, stepping into the Federal Reserve's territory and doing by statute what the Federal Reserve is already doing. The Federal Reserve is probably more flexible is more flexible than the U.S. Congress in its action. And here I wonder whether the administrator is more flexible than we are. But I guess, but you're answering my question, which is that your concept is to put it in statute, and so that's helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there further comments on the amendment? If no, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The third amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentlelady from Maryland, Ms. Edwards. Ms. Edwards, are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to committee print, amendment number 005, offered by Ms. Edwards of Maryland.
Ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentlelady for 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The purpose of my amendment is to help ensure that the climate services to be provided by the National Climate Service are not duplicative and adequately address user needs that are currently not being met. We need to know who the customers are for this new service and what they expect to receive from it. As we heard just the other day in testimony, NOAA and its partner organizations, the regional climate centers, the regional assessment teams, and state climatologists are delivering climate services today. As we move to expand these services, we need to have a good snapshot of our starting point. We need to know who is served by these services today and what's being provided to them. In addition, we must know more about the new customers we want to reach and what information would be most useful to them. Specifically, my amendment requires the Undersecretary to provide a report to Congress within 6 months that identifies the specific user groups and stakeholders that currently are being served by NOAA and its partner organizations, the type of climate products and services currently delivered to specific user groups and stakeholders, and the specific NOAA office or partner organization that delivers these products and services. We also ask for potential user groups and stakeholders that may be served by expanding climate products and services and the specific needs for new climate products and services identified by user groups and stakeholders. The amendment specifies that the Undersecretary shall consult with the Climate Service Advisory Group in developing this report. We need to do what we can to ensure that the new National Climate Service is adequately meeting the needs of all user groups and stakeholders. I believe my amendment will help to do just that, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your leadership on this important issue, and I urge the committee to adopt this amendment.
I thank the gentlelady. Once again, as with Mr. Tonko, we heard testimony to precisely these issues. One of the issues was to what extent people are availing themselves of the knowledge and who do they turn to if they want to gather the information. I think your amendment speaks very well to both of those issues. Are there any further comments or discussion of the amendment?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Inglis is recognized.
I think it sounds like a good idea. It's sort of like the last discussion we're having. Ms. Edwards, it sounds like a great concept to have these stakeholders consulted and make sure that we get the best possible functioning climate service out of this. The question I've had is that the office is going to be set up before this 6-month review takes place. So I wonder how that works. We're already going to have a climate service in place, and then we're going to do within 6 months have this report. But the office is already going to have been stood up. So I wonder how we get out in front so that we get the office stood up with this kind of input rather than have it stood up and then later gets the input.
Would the gentleman
We
yield?
have to yield.
Well, it's a legitimate question. I think one of the thoughts is that we will not create the climate service instantaneously. And we already know from our testimony and from the studies that have been done, many of the existing players in terms of what agencies will be involved. I think my understanding of the gentlelady's amendment is to try to make sure that as we put those folks together, we then can give them their marching orders in perhaps some new ways. At least that's my interpretation and our intent with the underlying bill. So I think they'll be moving in a parallel track is the idea. You start the survey, build your structure, then add that information to what you've got as your structure. But that's my take on it.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And the point is as well that many products and services are currently being produced, and we need to have a good inventory of those. And as the agency evolves, there'll be other products and services that will be delivered as well. And the question is, will we get enough information from stakeholders so that over time we begin to incorporate that into a usable product? I mean, the last thing that we want to do is to create an agency that's producing products and services that aren't really used by the field. And so this will give us a handle on what currently exists, what the stakeholders have identified in their existing work in terms of what they need as the climate service evolves. Thank you.
Would the gentleman yield for one more observation? Within the existing bill also are two FACA committees, one to look at the science and another one to look at the user, the consumers of this. And I think your point's well taken. So often it seems in the legislative branch we create these entities, don't necessarily track to see if they're doing anybody any good. I think the gentlelady's right on top of this by saying let's make sure that we know what we're trying to serve, who we're trying to serve, and that they know the services are available. Both her amendment and then I think the FACA committees inherent in the bill will make sure that happens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there any further comments? If no, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to. The fourth amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan, Dr. Ehlers. Dr. Ehlers, are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, I have this superb amendment at the desk.
Would expect nothing less. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to committee print, amendment number 018, offered by Mr. Ehlers of Michigan.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman from 5 minutes to explain the amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have to give a bit of history on this. This is a 9-year bill, which I'm offering as an amendment. It is very important to know, I believe most people and most members, I suspect, don't realize that Congress has never established NOAA by law. It was established by President Nixon through an executive order, and over the years its governance and its mission has been modified by repeated executive orders, but the Congress itself has not had a great deal to do with it. Noting this deficiency some 9 years ago when I chaired this, the equivalent of this subcommittee, we began working on this and have developed an organic act for the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. This was reported out by this committee. It went to the floor of the House. It was passed by the House, but it was near the end of the session, and the Senate did not act in time to put it into effect. Since then, the Resources Committee has been trying to pass an Oceans Act, which is extremely important, and I wish them well. I hope they do pass it. But in the meantime, this particular bill was held up because they wanted some say in how this would work, but they were never able to get the bill out, to get their bill out. I plan to withdraw this amendment after we have some discussion on it, but I wanted to highlight that this is a very important issue. NOAA continues to act strictly under the executive orders, and there's a great need for an organic act, as we have for most government agencies. And I would certainly hope that we can take this issue up here, report it, get it on its way, but above all, make certain that it doesn't die an untimely death once again in the Resources Committee. With that, I'll delay with withdrawing until there's some discussion on this. I yield back.
Dr. Ehlers, I thank you very much for offering the amendment, and I know where it's coming from because you have worked so diligently for so many years on the importance of establishing an Organic Act for NOAA. I participated in hearings when you were the chair of this committee and support you in that. As you know, the committee has in the past acted on that very legislation to which you're referring as an amendment today. Unfortunately, however, our colleagues on the Resources Committee have not been able to come to an agreement on the provisions in their jurisdiction. Chairman Gordon has indicated to me that he would be willing to move legislation to provide an Organic Act for NOAA when we see some progress by the Committee on Natural Resources. I have no insights into their current plans for the legislation at this point, but as a result of your good work, this committee would be ready to move quickly once we receive some indication that they're ready to go. It may also be that the Senate would choose to move something forward. I would be more than happy to meet with you and with the chairman and others who are interested, and perhaps even chat with the folks at NOAA and the folks at Resources to see if we can't come up with a way to resolve these issues, as I share your belief that it is an optimal situation that agencies with this importance, which we all agree NOAA has that level of importance, have an Organic Act to establish them. And I commend you for your leadership on this and your persistence on it. The challenge we face today is that the amendment is well outside the scope of the bill and would probably therefore trigger a referral to Natural Resources of this legislation and would therefore appreciate your suggestion you may withdraw it, but I would offer my personal commitment to work with you to try to move this forward again through this committee and through Resources as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that commitment, and I look forward to working with you on it. But as you well know, the problem is not within this committee. It's within the political dynamics within the House itself. And so it's not going to be easy unless we somehow manage to write a bill which will not be referred to another committee. And that would be very difficult because much of their jurisdiction is under NOAA too. But I think the point is we simply have to keep pressing the issue, and we may be able to resolve the issue without having to go through the other committee. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yeah, I understand Mr. Hall would like to make a comment before.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, briefly, I just want to lend my support to my colleague on his efforts to get the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration officially authorized by Congress. And as Chairman Baird stated, an Organic Act would provide this agency additional direction from its authorizing committee and would provide a framework within which such programs as the National Climate Service could be developed. I know this has been a desire of Dr. Ehlers for some time, and I'm hopeful that the committee will find the time to consider this legislation. I thank the chair and yield back my time.
I thank Mr. Hall. Are there other members who wish to offer any comments? Mr. Ehlers?
I thank Chairman Hall, or I'm sorry, Ranking Member, even though he should be Chairman. Just unbiased comment. I thank him for his comments, and I appreciate his support. And with that, I will withdraw the amendment.
I thank the gentleman and just reiterate my commitment to work with you further on this. The Fifth Amendment on the roster is another excellent amendment offered by the gentleman from Michigan, Dr. Ehlers. Dr. Ehlers, are you ready to proceed with your amendment?
Yes, I am. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to committee print, amendment number 017, offered by Mr. Ehlers of Michigan.
I ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize the gentleman from Michigan for 5 minutes to explain his amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This once again will be an amendment which I will withdraw in a few minutes. But I've spent a fair amount of time in management in my life, and I think we have, unless we very carefully structure this, we're going to have continuing competition and perhaps even disagreements and administrative problems with a new climate service office and the current weather service office, unless we very clearly specify the relationship between the two and the administrative ties between the two and their role within NOAA. I think the way it was presented to us is even though I suspect it'll work very well initially, as time goes on, there's going to be a lot of political infighting about who does what, who gets what money, etc. This, my offering of this amendment is to make that point. I will also move to withdraw this because I think it needs considerably more action and study than we can give it this morning. But I just wanted to alert everyone to the forthcoming problem unless we can very clearly specify lines of command and assignment of duties and responsibilities. So I will yield back at this point and let the chairman comment on it.
Mr. Ehlers, we spoke briefly. Once again, I think you're right on the mark. I think this committee has seen, as probably almost every committee in Congress has seen areas in which, examples in which well-intentioned efforts on the part of the Congress to encourage and indeed require collaboration among agencies have gone awry for a host of reasons. There are also, however, are examples of where they have functioned quite well with constructive results for the good of the public. Our intent certainly is to make sure the latter occurs, but your point is very, very well taken, that there will need to be commitment on all the agencies to cooperate. There will need to be a clear-cut chain of command that can make sure that does occur. And frankly, I think it'll be incumbent upon this committee to monitor that once the Office of Climate Change is created. And our Office of Climate Services is created. And so I share your concern, commit to working with you, to seeing if there's a way we can make sure this happens either by being somewhat more specific in our language or by working closely with NOAA once the bill is enacted as well. And appreciate your offer to withdraw and again make a personal commitment to work with you on this absolutely essential point. Recognize Mr. Ehlers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate that, and this is just not a whim of mine. As I say, I do have some administrative experience, but I was struck when I was occupying the role you have now as chairman to discover, I thought, a substantial amount of mismanagement or poor management on the part of individuals in NOAA. An example, of course, is their satellite program, which was $2 billion over budget before we were even notified of it. And it took immense amount of effort on the part of this committee as well as NOAA and NASA to put the horse and carriage back together again. I could not comprehend a project getting that far off budget and so far offline without someone somewhere along the line saying, wait, we've got a problem here, and notifying the committee of it. And that's what I'm trying to avoid here. If the history had a record of superb management, I would be less concerned. But there have been a number of cases where they have not shown that, and I think we have to specify this very clearly.
I share the gentleman's concern. Again, I think this committee has an essential role to play to make sure that all the agencies that will be involved in the climate service appreciate the importance of coordination and that they have a line of command basically that ensures that happen, and that we do our oversight role. And I again share your concern.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I withdraw the amendment.
The amendment is withdrawn. The sixth amendment on the roster is an amendment offered by the chair. The clerk will report the amendment.
Amendment to committee print, amendment number 004, offered by Mr. Baird of Washington.
Ask unanimous consent to dispense with the reading. Without objection, so ordered. I recognize myself for 5 minutes to explain the amendment. My amendment is intended to provide greater transparency and accountability with respect to the development of a national climate service. The underlying legislation provides flexibility to NOAA in establishing the National Climate Service. However, we do not want this bill to be the end of our work with the agency as the administration moves forward to complete the effort. My amendment ensures that Congress and other stakeholders will have an opportunity for input on the agency's plans and to shape the service going forward. My amendment requires the Undersecretary to prepare a plan for creating the National Climate Service in NOAA and delivering the climate products and services to NOAA users and stakeholders, and that they submit that plan to the President and the Congress within 6 months. Under this amendment, the plan will identify current gaps in climate services and outline the processes and resources that will be used to fill those gaps, describe the roles of NOAA offices and partner organizations in the development and delivery of climate products and services, and identify new responsibilities or tasks to be undertaken by the offices and organizations. It will also describe the development and implementation of quality assurance and control mechanisms, identify the mechanisms and opportunities for determining user needs and engaging in a two-way dialogue with users, and identify new infrastructure, equipment, personnel, or other resources needed to implement the proposed plan. The plan is to be developed in consultation with user groups and stakeholders, other federal agencies, the Climate Service Advisory Committee, and Congress. This amendment further specifies that a draft of the plan shall be published in the Federal Register and made available for public comment. Finally, my amendment provides for continuity of service by requiring NOAA to continue to provide the climate services to users while the plan is being developed. This is a common sense amendment. It addresses many of the concerns that have been raised before. Our goal is to give NOAA the direction to create the climate service, give them support in that, also give them guidance, but have them have a mechanism to report back to us. We're trying to provide that balance between giving flexibility for administrative decisions while at the same time keeping us informed so as to avoid the kind of problems that others on this committee, notably Mr. Ehlers and Mr. Inglis, have recognized earlier. Are there further discussion of this amendment? Is there further discussion of the amendment? If no, the vote occurs on the amendment. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The amendment's agreed to. Are there any other amendments? If no, then the vote is on the committee print as amended. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. I recognize myself to offer a motion. I move that the committee favorably report the committee print as amendment to the full committee in a form to be determined by the chair. Furthermore, I move that staff be instructed to prepare the subcommittee report and make necessary technical and conforming changes to the print in accordance with the recommendations of the subcommittee. The question is on the motion to report the print favorably. Those in favor of the motion will signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the print is favorably reported. Without objection, the motion to reconsider is laid upon the table. Members will have 2 subsequent calendar days in which to submit supplemental, minority, or additional views on the measure. I want to thank members for their attendance. This concludes our subcommittee markup. Thanks, Bob. Let's get together on this.